Okay, so welcome everyone to this episode of All About Soul. I have a guest with me, Prashanthi Amarnath, and we are going to discuss paradox, Tao, learning how to live with more trust and with paradox, I suppose. And our conversation will also center on Prashanthi's book, Embracing Paradox. So, Prashanthi, without further ado, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Inga. My name is Prashanthi, and I am the author of Embracing Paradox. It's the book inspired by Tao Te Ching and written during a period of deep spiritual introspection. And I'm not a traditional scholar of Taoism. I'm a mother, a full-time tech professional, and someone who encountered the Tao at a crossroads in my life. So in Embracing Paradox, I explore the 81 verses of the Tao Te Ching through short, accessible reflections. Really, anyone can integrate into their everyday lives. It is meant to be a companion for those navigating uncertainty, overwhelm, and the beautiful contradictions of modern life. I'm grateful to be here, and I'm looking forward to exploring how this ancient wisdom can support the minds and the hearts. And as a child, Inga, I did not grow up asking whether the sacred was real. I grew up assuming it was, like devotion, ritual, silence, mystery. These were not like abstract ideas, right? They were woven into my daily life, into conversation, into the air itself, and some of the most formative experiences of my life happened long before I had a language to explain them. I grew up around my guru, and there were moments I witnessed that my logical mind had no framework for, and moments that felt impossible, moments that just did not fit neatly within the laws of physical reality as I understood them. And they were not dramatic, right? In the way stories often make them sound. They were quiet, they were subtle, but unmistakable. There was a very quiet recognition inside me that said, maybe reality is bigger than what I can understand. But here's where the story becomes more complicated and more human, right? As life unfolded, I encountered different worldviews. I entered spaces shaped by science, technology, logic, data, and analysis. And suddenly, the part of me that witnessed the unexplainable began to question itself. Was I just young, influenced by culture or parents? And I swung hard in the opposite direction. And honestly, right, that swing was necessary. It sharpened my discernment. It taught me how to doubt intelligently. It forced me to examine assumptions, test ideas, and resist those blind belief. But something else became clear too. Neither side felt complete on its own. One dissolved into fantasy and the other one just collapsed into reduction. And somewhere between the two, I realized something fundamental, right? The problem was never about mysticism or reason. The problem was the demand that I choose. So I stopped trying to choose. Instead, I began to inhabit that space between. And then Taoism entered my life, not as an ideology, but as a recognition, because the Tao does not force you to choose between a mystical and rational. The Tao says they arise from the same source, the mystery and the reason. They're not enemies, not contradictions, but expressions of the same underlying reality. Taoism gave me a language for something I had already been living. It articulated what I had sensed but never fully named. That paradox is not a flaw in our understanding. It's a feature of reality itself. Life is not meant to be flattened into a certainty. Like truth is not always linear. Wisdom does not always arrive as an answer. Sometimes it arrives as a capacity to hold opposites without tearing yourself apart. And this book, Embracing Paradox, is not an argument against science, nor it is a defense of mysticism. It's an exploration of what becomes possible when we stop demanding that reality conform to our preferred framework. It is about learning to live without collapsing like mystery into fantasy or reason into rigidity. It was about discovering a way of seeing that is both grounded and open, discerning and receptive, clear and humble. Paradox, as I have come to understand, is not a confusion, it is depth. This is not a book about answers. It is a book about orientation, about learning how to stand inside uncertainty without fear. Because reality is larger than our explanations. And wisdom begins not when we eliminate this paradox, but when we learn how to live within it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you bring up so much as you say it, because in a certain sense, I resonate with what you say, because I've also been going between the opposites all my life. Culturally, probably very different, because I actually grew up in very rationalistic household, and the culture was anti-religion, supernatural, everything has to be rational. But I came to faith in the divine very early on in my life, and just like you, I've witnessed things without rational explanation, and I still keep doing this now. But I went back and forth between also personally, like, oh, being a good girl and a bad girl, right? Between conformism and non-conformism, faith and belief. And in the dominant culture I was in the West, rationality is expected, right? People want clear answers. Is it this or that? No, paradox, because paradox makes the mind short circuit. So it doesn't, it's not very popular. And so it's, sometimes I still catch myself that I have this innate drive to explain things because it's so easy for the mind. So yeah, I wonder how did this capacity to hold paradox shape your spiritual life or your practical spirituality?
Absolutely. This is a great question, because from a Taoist perspective, writing a paradox is not confusion. It's the doorway to truth. So Taoism begins by breaking the mind's favorite habit, the need to be certain, the need to divide life into clean, manageable pieces. The Tao tells us very clearly that reality does not work that way. The first line of the Tao Te Ching is already a paradox. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. That's not poetry for decoration. That's a warning. It's saying the moment you think you fully explained life, you've already lost touch with it. Because paradox exists in Taoism because life itself is paradoxical. Strength comes from softness, power comes from yielding, fullness depends on emptiness, knowing begins with not knowing. To the logical mind, this sounds backwards. To nature, it's obvious. Like, look at water, the great Taoist teacher. Water does not force its way forward, it yields, bends, adapts. And yet, over time, it shapes mountains and carves valleys. What looks weak endures. And that is paradox. And it is not symbolic, it's practical wisdom, like you said. Taoism uses paradox because straight lines doesn't describe a flowing world. The mind wants fixed answers. Is this right or wrong? Is this good or bad? Should I act or wait? Should I push or let go? The Tao responds yes, but not always at the same time. Paradox trains us to stop clinging to absolutes. It forces us to slow down to feel context, timing, and balance. balance. It moves us from rigid thinking into living intelligence. And this is why Taoist wisdom often sounds contradictory. Do less, accomplish more, yield and overcome, be empty and be full. These aren't riddles to solve. These are instructions for how to live without breaking yourself against the reality. Paradox also exposes the limits of the ego because the ego wants to be right. It wants certainty, it wants control. But life doesn't submit to control, it responds to relationship. Like yin and yang embody this perfectly. They're opposites, yet they depend on one another. Each contains the seed of the other. When one reaches its extreme, it transforms into its opposite. This means nothing stays fixed. No position is absolute. And here's the uncomfortable truth Taoism reveals. Much of our suffering comes from resisting paradox. We want the joy without sorrow, growth without the discomfort. But the Tao says that's not how life works. Night gives meaning to the day. Stillness gives power to moment. Loss deepens love. Uncertainty shapes awareness. And paradox teaches humility. It reminds us that wisdom isn't about having that the final answer. It's about staying in rhythm with the change. That's why Taoist sage speaks in stories and metaphors and contradictions instead of commandments. Paradox keeps us awake. It prevents arrogance. It prevents rigidity. It keeps us responsive instead of reactive. And when you stop trying to eliminate paradox and instead learn to stand inside it, something shifts. You become less defensive, less extreme, more grounded. You stop asking which side is right and start asking what is appropriate now.
Mhm.
That is the Taoist intelligence, not performative, quiet, responsive, precise. So, from a Taoist perspective, paradox is not an obstacle to understanding, it is the teacher that frees us from false certainty. It loosens our grip on ideas. It softens our need to dominate life. And it returns us to harmony with the world that is alive, that is changing, and that's far more intelligent than our concepts. So the Tao does not want us to conquer life with answers, it wants us to just move with it. And paradox is how it teaches us to do exactly that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm listening to you, and actually, some of the words you say are almost either not a direct quote, I suppose, but a direct
Mhm.
interpretation of some of the things my Sufi teachers would say. I said, well,
Mhm.
this is remarkably similar. There was a book.
Mhm.
I didn't quite finish it, but it's called The Tao of Islam.
Mhm.
And there was a Japanese woman who was actually working with the Sufi concepts and the Tao concepts, finding them remarkably similar. Now I understand why.
My
But
goodness.
I'm, yeah,
I love
it's,
Rumi. I'm a huge fan. So
yeah, it's, yeah, I'm a bit speechless, but like, I'm trying, you see, I'm trying not to stand in the paradox. I try to solve the problem already. That's perfect.
it's beautiful how you recognize that. You're there.
Well, at least I recognize.
Yeah. Oh, that's the biggest step. It takes it takes millions and millions of lifetimes to get there, Inga. So you yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing to meet a soul and have this beautiful conversation about random things. So thank you.
Sure, but I was
Mm.
wondering if you could share about your own experience with your guru, with a spiritual teacher, and how this shaped your uh, path, I suppose, and your development.
Absolutely. One topic I never get tired of speaking about is gratitude, and more specifically, the quiet glory I wish to offer to my God, my Guru, Sri Sathya Sai Baba. From a Taoist perspective, glory is not something you declare. It is something you live without announcing. My guru shaped my life in ways that are difficult to measure but impossible to deny. I was born into his fold, and I hold that with deep humility because it placed me in a very unique position in life, not one of privilege, but of trust. From very early on, I grew up knowing I had a powerful ally on my side. And that awareness changes everything, not because it makes life easier, but because it changes how you meet life. In Taoism, the sage does not boast of protection, right? They simply walk without fear. I grew up listening to my guru speak, not just about spirituality, but how to live, how to love, how to see others, how to act with integrity when no one is watching, how to walk through the world with compassion instead of force. Love was never presented to me as an idea, it was a way of being. And perhaps because of that, I grew up a little different. I was never the sharpest voice in the room. I wasn't witty in a way that earns applause. I wasn't popular. I often stepped back instead of forward. From a world's point of view, this might look like weakness. But from a Tao's point of view, this is yielding. Water does not announce its strength, and yet nothing shapes the world more deeply. The one place where hesitation dissolved, it didn't feel learned, it didn't feel remembered, as if I had been prepared long before I knew preparation was happening, not to impress, not to argue, not to convert, but simply to speak from love. In Taoism, the sage does not try to persuade. They allow the truth to move through them naturally. There was a moment that stays with me so deeply. I received a message from my guru that said, "How do you think someone like you went through what you went through and still came out unscathed?" That question just pierced straight through me, Inga, because life had not been easy. There were moments of confusion, doubt, pain, as there are for everyone. I'm not saying I had more pain, but I'm just saying everyone has to, they go through this. But when I looked honestly, I realized something undeniable. I had been held, I had been guided, protected, strengthened, and not shielded from life, but carried through it. In Taoism, true power is never about being special. It's about being useful without claiming importance. And I don't see my path as something I achieved, I see it as something I was entrusted with. My guru didn't teach me to escape the world. He taught me how to move through it without hardness, with love as my compass. And if I can reflect even a fraction of that love that he has showed me into the world, then I know I'm honoring the grace I was given.
Yes, carried through. That rings true to my heart as well. Yeah, yeah. Mm, it's a sacred trust in a way that you've been given to carry into the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned you have a guru in your life too. You want to talk a little bit about that? I would love to hear about him or
Yeah, well, so my teacher comes from a Sufi tradition,
Mhm.
as I mentioned, and it's actually very perplexing because I never that was the last place I was going to look. I mean, poetry is fine, but practice was much scarier.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You're funny. I love that. Yeah.
um, so it was very unexpected, and yet, um, and we met online for the first time during COVID
Mm,
because one thing led to another. But it's that I know the feeling, the recognition of souls that I belong to the fold, right? I belong to the flock of
mhm.
the master.
Yep.
And uh, and that was I for me personally. I struggled a lot. I struggled a
Mm,
lot with my own fear of rejection, like, oh
mm,
no, he's not going to like me. So it's like the
mm,
relationship between me and the teacher was always a
mm,
mirror, still is like a
mm.
mirror of my own
Yeah.
insecurities, of my own fears, doubts. It's like, oh no,
Mm,
I don't like what he's saying, he must be a wrong
mm,
guru. It's not my guru.
mm.
Or,
Oh,
oh
yeah.
yes, this is
Mm,
this is this is it. So there is a dance of back
mm,
and forth, and I still have it, although I have accepted that
mm,
this is my teacher. But I thought, oh no, like maybe I have a more the kind of a more black and white teacher, someone who is more clear, someone who puts
yeah.
things
More
into the
direct.
framework. It's
Yeah.
Mhm. And the amazing thing was that I did not know these things about myself. I
Mhm.
thought I didn't have those problems. So I projected it onto him. So I said,
Mm.
oh, he's a bad teacher. I need a different one. And now that I recognize that, and I mean, there were incredible things. I remember once we were walking in Lebanon, actually, and we were he and his wife and me and a friend of mine, we went into a restaurant, and there was nothing was said, there was no teaching, we were just talking like normal human beings. I remember after this meeting I realized, oh my gosh, I've been really uh, diminishing myself in my relationships.
Mm.
It was I was picking up lost puppies all around the world. I mean, was it is it really who I am? And of course I was looking for love, and they didn't respect
Mm.
me. It just completely opened my eyes. I thought,
Mm.
oh well, this will never happen again. And it's not a decision, it's like, oh, this will never happen again, but it's like a veil has been lifted, and I realized I will just not be the same again. I will not have the same
Mhm.
relationships with people. And I'm talking about maybe romantic, but even friendly relationships,
Mm.
where I try to be very
Yeah.
helpful and end up not being respected. And
Mhm.
this happened not because of what my teacher told me, but
Mhm.
because of the way he treated me. Just as simple as that. There was no teaching, no, you should do this. So it was just something in the way he treated me, in the way he spoke to me, that I realized I've allowed myself to be disrespected way too much beyond, my worth is so much more. And it's like, boom, the veil just dropped. And
Mm.
it's true, those types of relationships never repeated again, and I never
Mm.
had a desire to
Yeah.
over please people, or just that, like, the whole chapter has been closed. And I see it as one of the greatest miracles, because nobody had to recite prayers over me or do any kind of it's just a living contact with a teacher who is again
Mhm.
connected to a living
Mhm.
lineage, right, to the
Yeah.
channel, the
Yeah.
open flow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
yeah, there is no way of explaining it, so I can only share
Mm.
this, my personal experience.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And yeah. There's something, right, that the human mind does almost instinctively, especially when we are on a spiritual path. It looks for signs, divine signs, signals from the universe, patterns that feel meaningful, the moments that seem too precise to be a coincidence. And for many people, this is seen as a beautiful thing, a sign of faith. And in many ways, that's true. But there's another side to that, a quieter, more complicated side, and that's what maybe we could explore today. But because the same mind that looks for signs also becomes a constant seeker, right? Always scanning, always interpreting, and always asking, what does this mean? Is this a guidance? Am I on the right path? And this is a fascinating paradox. And it's the one I find myself walking through now and then, and back and forth. On one hand, looking for signs I can feel deeply affirming. It gives us a sense of connection. It reassures us that we're not alone. Life is responsive and there is intelligence moving through events. A song plays at the perfect moment. Someone says exactly, what you need to hear, and you think, oh, this can't be random, and maybe it isn't. But here's where that paradox begins. When the mind becomes attached to science, it also becomes dependent on them. Instead of resting in trust, it starts to outsource certainty. And slowly, without realizing it, the present moment becomes a waiting room for next signal, the next cosmic thumbs up. The mind starts to believe that clarity must arrive from somewhere else. And this is where
Mm.
seeking can quietly turn into restlessness. Because if you're always looking for a sign, it means on some level you believe that what is here right now is not enough. Because that insight can feel uncomfortable. And I want to be clear because this isn't about judging the mind or dismissing spirituality. It's about noticing how the relationship shifts. There's a difference between being receptive and being anxious for meaning. There's a difference between openness and scanning reality for reassurance. Like many spiritual traditions speak about this, they remind us that mind loves symbols, stories, and explanations. It wants orientation, it wants safety, it wants to know, am I doing this right? But deeper wisdom often doesn't arrive as a sign, it arrives as presence, as a quiet knowing, as a sense of alignment that doesn't need proof, a peace that doesn't require interpretation. And that's where the paradox sharpens, because science can be real and yet still distract us from that deeper work. They can point, but they're not the destination. When we become obsessed with science, we risk missing what's already speaking: the body, the breath, the inner sense of rightness or resistance that doesn't announce itself dramatically. And yet, for me, this is like no longer a question of right versus wrong, right? It's a question of relationship. As I'm noticing signs with curiosity, or am I clinging to them for certainty? This is the paradox I'm living inside right now, learning to allow the signs without chasing them, learning to trust without demanding a proof. Because perhaps the deepest guidance isn't hidden in symbols at all. Perhaps it
Mm.
is here in how steady we are when no sign appears, in how grounded we remain when nothing dramatic happens, in how willing we are to stay present without interpretation. And maybe the mind seeks signs, but wisdom learns to abide. And maybe the paradox isn't meant to be resolved. Maybe it's meant to be lived gently, honestly, and just without forcing an answer. And there's a paradox that I keep coming back to, and maybe you will recognize it too, Inga. It's the awareness that there are things I did in my life that I'm not proud of, choices I made, ways the way I showed up or didn't, moments I wish I could rewrite. For a long time, I told myself a story about those moments. I said I had to do those things to get here. They were necessary. They were part of my journey. And for a while, right, that story helped me survive my past. But recently something shifted. I realized that while those choices may have been necessary then, they do not have to be now. I don't have to repeat the behavior simply because they once protected me, because now I carry something I didn't have back then, which is the wisdom. What I see clearly now is this: these actions were authentic to who I was at that moment. I was doing my best I could do with the awareness, tools, and the capacity I had. That version of me wasn't wrong, it was unfinished. Your authenticity is not fixed, it evolves. Being authentic then meant surviving, but being authentic now means choosing differently. if I get to apply what I've learned, I get to be better, like not out of guilt, but out of growth. I get to honor who I was by living with more awareness than I could back then. And that realization softened something deep inside me because we're often cruel to our past selves. We judge them, we carry the clarity only gained later. We forget that growth changes perspective. Every version of you had a role. There were carriers, they carried you forward until you are ready to carry yourself differently. And now the invitation is simple, though not easy, right? Be the most authentic version of yourself in this moment, the most honest. That honesty won't always be comfortable. Sometimes it looks like uncertainty. Sometimes it looks like slowing down. Sometimes it looks like saying no where you used to say yes. But authenticity isn't about perfection, it's about alignment. All you can ever be at any point in your life is who you truly are right now. And
Mhm.
that is enough. There is no more to life than this. And there is no less. Just this moment met honestly, fully inhabited. And when we stop fighting who we are, we don't just move forward, we move home.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting because in the past year or so, I've noticed one thing has been happening to me is that I stopped judging myself and judging my past. I noticed that there was so much judgment. I didn't even recognize it before. I thought, well, but actually, I did the best I could with the situation I had. I I did remarkably well. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I didn't have this realization before. I kept looking for flaws, right? Oh, this is a mistake. This should have been done differently. Oh, this was horrible. But I see that person, 10 years ago or 15 years ago. But with the situation and with the knowledge and under the circumstances, I don't judge her anymore. It's interesting because it freed up a lot of space inside me for compassion, also towards others and towards myself in the present moment. There was so much of like an overlay of, how shall I call it, performative spirituality that kind of needed to go. And I think, yeah, I think I'm exactly in that process, in this grind where I am. I may be 10% of the person, of the spiritual person I thought I would be, but
Yeah.
I am authentic, and it's like it's
Mhm.
exactly this process where I recognize that I will never be perfect. It's about something else
Yeah.
entirely.
Absolutely. And I think you'll relate to another topic that I've been speaking a lot about recently. It's the topic about identity flexibility, right? About how the Tao gives us the permission to be many versions of ourselves across a lifetime. Sometimes I look at my old photographs and I laugh. I barely recognize her. Different face, different energy, different beliefs, and yet every single of those versions were true at the time. That to me is one of the greatest gifts Taoism gave me, Inga. The permission to evolve without shame. I can say this openly now. There was a time when I deeply believed in tarot and crystals, and I worked with subtle energies, and I participated in plant medicine ceremony. I did ayahuasca once. None of that feels wrong to me. It was honest, it was sincere. It met me exactly where my consciousness was at that time. But something shifted, right? At a certain point on that path, the Tao doesn't shout, it doesn't criticize, it doesn't invalidate your past. It simply says, now it's your turn. Not in judgment, not in superiority, not in responsibility. There's a reminder in Taoist thought that cuts straight through spiritual bypassing. When awareness matures, we stop outsourcing our power. At higher levels of consciousness, the tools doesn't stop working. We just no longer need to lean on them. Not because the universe stopped speaking, right? But because we started listening directly. Instead of asking science, we tell us what to do. We become the clarity. Instead of relying on predictions, we align our actions. And this is where love becomes grounded. Love isn't waiting for fate to decide. Love isn't hoping the universe make it easy. Love is choosing presence, choosing honesty, choosing aligned action, even when nothing guarantees the outcome. That's Wu Wei. Not passivity, not surrender as avoidance, but right effort. Action that arises from alignment, not fear. When love becomes embodied, it stops being dramatic. It becomes steady, relational, quietly powerful. And when I look at my life right now, growth doesn't feel like achievement, it feels like upgrade. Not just spiritually, but everywhere. Relationships, boundaries, voice, responsibility. The Tao didn't tell me who to become. It helped me stop clinging to who I no longer was. And love, like real love, is what made that possible. And that's how we know the divine, not by predicting the future, not by fixing our identity, but by meeting life again and again with openness, humility, and care. The Tao says when you're aligned, the way reveals itself. And alignment is love lived, not imagined. So that's an interesting perspective because the we hear the word war everywhere, right,
Mhm.
Inga?
Mhm.
It's everywhere. But from a perspective of Tao Te Ching, right, the war begins much earlier than that. It begins in the human heart.
Yes. Yes.
It begins the moment fear it convinces us that domination is the same as safety, that control will bring peace. And that's why the Tao Te Ching feels more relevant now than ever, because we're living in a time of constant war between nations, war between identities, between ideologies, and perhaps most quietly, the war within ourselves.
Of course. And
The
that's where it starts, doesn't it? Yeah.
it starts exactly there. And this is where Tao Te Ching comes very handy in times like this, because it was written over 2,000 years ago during a period of near constant warfare in ancient China. States were fighting relentlessly for power, like leaders were obsessed with control. And Lao Tzu wasn't writing from comfort, he was responding to collapse. And what he offered was not strategy, not heroism, not victory. He offered
Yes.
restraint. And the Tao Te Ching calls weapons tools of ill omen, sometimes unavoidable but never to be celebrated. Victory is never glorified. And that alone feels radical, because in times of war, cultures glorify strength, aggression, certainty.
Yes.
The Tao does the opposite. It asks us to consider the cost of force, not just in lives lost, but in what force does to the soul. And the Tao reminds us that hardness invites resistance, while softness endures. That water, like yielding, patient, it outlasts the rock. And that what is rigid eventually breaks. And this is not weakness, this is intelligence. Right? The Tao interrupts the cycle of escalation by asking a simple question: what happens after you win? Because every victory achieved through force carries the seed of next conflict. And that's why Tao teaches Wu Wei, not non forcing, not passivity, but restraint when force feels tempting. Yielding, not because you're powerless, but because you see further. And perhaps the deepest teaching is this, right? Our outer war mirrors the inner war. And when we are at war with ourselves, our fear, our doubt, our softness, we project that violence outward. So the Tao invites us to end that inner war first, like you said, Inga. That's where it starts. The peace in Taoism is not created by victory, it is created by alignment. And maybe that is why the Tao Te Ching matters now more than ever. It doesn't ask us to turn away from suffering. It asks us not to become it.
Yeah. How would you say, because you mentioned this concept, I'm asking two questions in one. You mentioned this concept of Wu Wei, and maybe you could clarify it also a little more. And how would you say we can apply it to our own inner battle against ourselves, or we try to battle against
Yeah,
ourselves. How can we apply that? Yeah.
of course. Okay, for this, let me talk about the yin and yang. So, one of the most misunderstood symbols in Taoism is yin and yang, because most people think it means balance, light and dark, good and bad, opposites. But yin and yang are not opposites, they're partners. They're not fighting each other, they're dancing. And the moment we understand that, something in modern life starts to make a lot more sense. Yin and yang describe how life actually moves. Yin is stillness, yang is action. Yin is rest, yang is effort. Yin is listening, yang is speaking. Neither is better, neither is complete on its own. And here's the part we often miss: each one contains the seed of the other. That small dot inside the symbol, that's not decoration, it's the truth. Even in light, there is darkness. Even in strength, there is vulnerability. Even in moment, there is a need to stop. More productivity, more ambition, more speed, more output. We celebrate doing, and we reward hustle. We glorify exhaustion. But we rarely ask, where is the yin? Where is the rest that makes action sustainable? Where is the silence that makes clarity possible? Where is the pause that allows wisdom to emerge? When yang dominates without yin, we burn out. When effort is disconnected from rest, life starts to feel like pressure instead of flow. And the irony is this: the more we push, the less effective we become. And Taoism teaches that life moves in cycles, not straight lines. Inhaling requires exhaling. Your day turns into night. Growth is followed by decay, and decay feeds growth again. Modern life, however, tells us to stay in growth mode forever, always expanding, always improving, always becoming. But without yin, yang turns destructive. Without rest, action becomes aggression. Without reflection, ambition becomes emptiness. In relationships, when speaking replaces listening, in ourselves, where self-worth becomes tied to achievement, yin and yang remind us that wholeness is dynamic. Balance doesn't mean 50-50. It means responsive. Some seasons ask for a moment, some seasons ask for stillness, and wisdom is knowing that difference. There are moments in life when pushing forward is right, and there are moments when stopping is most courageous thing that you can do. And yin is not weakness, yin is wisdom waiting. Yang is not aggression, yang is energy in motion. The Tao doesn't ask us to choose between them. It asks us to honor them both. So what does this look like practically? Right? It might mean allowing yourself to rest without the guilt. It
Yeah.
might mean listening instead of reacting. It might mean not forcing clarity when life is asking for patience. It might mean recognizing that certainty is not a failure. It's in doing its work, and action will come. It always does. But when it comes from alignment rather than fear, it feels different. It feels effortless. Yin and yang are not about perfection, they are about participation, participating in the rhythm of life rather than trying to control it. So the invitation is simple, right? Notice when you're forcing. Notice when you're resisting rest. Notice when softness becomes uncomfortable. That discomfort might be that exact place balance is trying to return.
Mhm.
Because life isn't asking you to be constantly strong, it's asking you to be whole. And wholeness is not static, it moves, it shifts, it breathes, just like you. So that's that's something a very practical insight into the usefulness of Tao in our lives, but also one of the most important Taoist teaching and one of the most healing is the idea that nothing in our internal experience is bad by itself.
Mhm.
In Taoism, right, every sensation is part of the natural flow of life. Every feeling, every tightening, every wave of fatigue or anxiety carries information. And when we stop fighting these sensations, something profound happens. They stop yelling. Most of us have been conditioned to treat discomfort as a malfunction. Tension means something's wrong. Fatigue means we are failing. Anxiety means that we are broken. But from Taoist lens, these sensations aren't obstacles, they're messengers. They're saying something needs attention. Slow down. You're carrying too much. You're out of alignment with your nature. When we meet the body through the lens of Taoism, we begin to see that tension is guidance. It tells us where we are gripping, forcing, pushing against ourselves. Fatigue is guidance. It tells us when we have moved out of rhythm from our energy. And anxiety is guidance. It tells us our perception has narrowed and we need more space, not more effort. The
Mhm.
moment we stop treating sensation as enemies, the nervous system receives different message, not fight this, because when a patient stops fighting their symptoms stop needing to escalate to get their attention. The body becomes less dramatic, the signals become clearer, the emotional spikes soften, the inner landscape becomes navigable again. And this is the paradox that Tao understands so well. The more we resist the body, the louder it becomes. The more we listen to the body, the softer it becomes. In a world that's obsessed with optimization, productivity, and fixing, Taoism reminds us that the body is not a machine, it's an ecosystem. And the ecosystem thrives through responsiveness, not force. So when patients shifts from shifting their sensation to listening to them, they begin to cooperate with their own nature. Like healing just stops being a project and becomes a relationship. And this is the heart of Taoist. And the body speaks in sensations. And when we honor those sensations, they guide us back to balance.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true because I encounter that so often with people. It's like, oh, and in the world, let's be fair. Of
Mhm.
course, there is a pressure. Right? Oh, I'm tired. I have to have more coffee or more whatever Red Bull
Yep.
energy drink. I need to keep going, right? To keep
Hmm.
producing.
Yep.
I have to. There
Yep.
is a kind of a looking down, and
Hmm.
then rest and relaxation becomes really a kind
Hmm.
of almost guilty. If you don't, you either party hard, right, or it's like, oh, it's what I always loved
Hmm.
traveling alone
Yep.
because like forever since I
Yep.
was since I was a teenager, because I could just sit there looking out of the window and do
Yep.
nothing. Now I notice it very much more that
Hmm. Hmm.
80% of people, they either fidget with their phones or play games or do
Yep.
something. It's becoming less and less, like from what I'm seeing, obviously,
Yep. Yep.
that it's even less acceptable to sit and do
Mm.
nothing. I'm like, oh my goodness, but it's so nice. Like, I want my mind to rest. Yeah.
Absolutely, and that's from again a Taoist perspective, right? That separation is not something that actually exists in nature. It is something the human mind creates, In
Yeah.
in Taoism, that is the Tao, the way, right? The Tao is not a thing. It's a natural flow of life itself. It cannot be like divided, owned, or fully named. And because the Tao is one continuous process, there's nothing outside of it. So when we talk about illusions of separation, right? Taoism would say this: separation appears only when we stop flowing with the Tao and begin naming, dividing, and grasping. In nature, nothing believes it is separate. A river does not argue with the shore. A tree does not compete with the forest. The wind does not ask where it belongs. Everything simply moves as it is. Human beings are the only ones that say, "This is me," and "That is not me." And the moment we do that, the tension is born. And the Lao Tzu tells us in Tao Te Ching that we start naming things, good and bad, success and failure, self and other. We lose sight of the Tao itself, not because the Tao disappears, but because we stop seeing it. The Tao is still flowing. And we are the ones who step out of that rhythm. From a Taoist view, the separation is not a moral failure, it is a misunderstanding. It's what happens when mind takes control and forgets the body, the breath, the earth, and the present moment. We start to believe that we are fixed self moving through a hostile or indifferent world. So we push. And that's why Taoism teaches Wu Wei, the effortless action. And this does not mean doing nothing. It means acting in harmony with what already is. When you act in harmony with the Tao, the sense of separation naturally dissolves, not because you try to eliminate it, but because you stop clinging to it. Think of a wave in the ocean, right? The wave can say, "I'm separate, I rise and fall alone," or it can recognize that it is the ocean, temporarily just moving in a particular form. From a Taoist perspective, you're not separate from life. You are life, moving as you. Your breath is not yours alone. Your body is not self made. Your thoughts arise from conditions you did not choose. This doesn't make you powerless, this makes you relational. When we forget this, fears appear. We become obsessed with control, identity, and outcome. We try to dominate life instead of dance with it. But when the illusion of separation softens, something very different happens. You stop forcing your way forward. You listen more. You respond instead of react. Compassion becomes natural, not moral. Like humility becomes ease, not weakness. Because when you know you are part of the Tao, you don't need to prove yourself against it. Taoism doesn't ask you to destroy your individuality, but you act like water that's flexible, that's responsive, and that is strong without the aggression. Water does not fight the rock, yet over time it shapes the mountains, and this is the power of non separation. So, from a Taoist perspective, the illusion of separation ends not through effort, belief, or philosophy, but through returning to breath, returning to that simplicity, returning to what is already here. And Lao Tzu calls this returning to the root. When you return, you don't become something new. You simply stop pretending you are ever apart. And in that remembering, life becomes lighter, not because problems vanish, but because you are no longer standing against the current. You are moving with, with the way, with the Tao. You are in alignment. And the Tao helps us in these times because it speaks directly to the moments of certainty, uncertainty, chaos, and exhaustion. And it does so without asking us to panic, force solutions, or become someone we are not. Right? From a Taoist perspective, what we are experiencing right now isn't abnormal. Like the period of instability, confusion, and rapid change are part of the natural rhythm of life, right? The problem isn't that the world feels unsettled. The problem is that we're trying to meet constant change with rigidity, right? The Tao
Yeah.
teaches that when life is in flux, the answer is not control, it's alignment. And one of the core insights of Taoism is this: when we fight the flow of reality, we suffer. When we move with it, we regain clarity and strength. And right now, many people feel overwhelmed because they're trying to think their way out of uncertainty. They're trying to predict, dominate, and secure a future that hasn't arrived yet. Taoism gently reminds us that this creates more tension, not less. The Tao doesn't ask us to withdraw from the world. It asks us to stop exhausting ourselves by resisting what we cannot control. And this is where Wu Wei becomes deeply relevant. Wu Wei doesn't mean doing nothing, it means not forcing. It means responding to life with intelligence, timing, and humility rather than, the fear and aggression. And this is where Tao reminds us that we are not fixed objects. We are processes. We are seasons, like how brewers are, how like our breath. And when you stop demanding that life be predictable, you regain that flexibility. And flexibility is resilience. In a world that feels increasingly divided, Taoism also offers a profound antidote. Right? It dissolves the illusion that life is made of opposing sides that must defeat one another, right? That this teaches us how to hold complexity without collapsing into despair or aggression. Like light and dark coexist, progress and regression coexist, certain and doubt coexist. And when we stop demanding purity or absolute answers, we become more humane with others and with ourselves too. Because perhaps most importantly, the Tao helps us return to simplicity. Not simplistic thinking, but simple living, your breath, your presence, attention to what is there right in front of us. When the world feels overwhelming, the Tao doesn't ask us to carry more, it asks us to carry less, to release what is unnecessary, to act where we are effective and let go where we are not. And in doing so, something quiet but powerful happens, right? We become less reactive, more grounded, more compassionate. Not because the world has suddenly become easier, but because we are no longer standing against it. In times like this, the Tao doesn't offer escape, it offers orientation. It reminds us that we are not broken for feeling unsettled. We are human. And that strength does not always look like pushing forward. Sometimes it looks like yielding, listening, and trusting that deeper current that has carried through far worse storms than this. The Tao has always been here, not as an answer, but as a way. And when we return to it, we don't find certainty, we find
Yeah,
steadiness.
our ancestors, of course, they knew it. Like ancestors, maybe we have to go 1,000 years
Mhm.
back. My ancestors,
Yeah.
the
Mhm.
connected ones, because in our culture, maybe they were disconnected for various reasons,
Mm.
through conquest or people lording over them. But their relationship with the cycles and rhythms of nature, with planting and harvesting, they knew that you can't push, right? The crops are not going to grow faster if you come every day and
Mhm.
check on them. And night has to come after the day because that's
Mhm.
the order of things. uh,
Yep. I-
yeah, we lost some
it's-
of that understanding in the West, especially, I think, was like the
oh God.
glorification of the rational mind.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so interesting you bring this up because I've always find myself drawn to the paradox and it's the one I'm actually living right now. So it's and it is that I'm sure you could relate to this. It's the paradox between the trust and surrender, very similar to what you talked about with the ancestors, because at that time they had the trust and surrender. They surrendered to the nature. They believe nature is the true God, and they had that kind of reverence towards nature, and that trust in something that is higher than ourselves. And I say this, right? I have a lot of, I used to, there was a phase in my life where I was an atheist too. So I went through the process, it's swung in many directions with respect to spirituality and my belief. So for someone like me, I did go through this, the the paradox between the trust and surrender. Because recently I
Mm.
received a message from my guru about something that will unfold in my life, right? It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it didn't come with instructions or timelines. It was simply given. And here's a paradox. I don't see clear evidence of it happening. I see glimpses, I see connections, I feel something aligning, but my mind, oh, my mind is in rush. It wants answers, it wants confirmation, it wants proof in the physical world. And instead, what I was being asked to offer was trust. And not
Mhm.
just intellectual trust, but embodied trust. The kind of trust is uncomfortable, especially for someone like me, because my past was not easy. I had to figure things out on my own. I had to be strong. So, somewhere deep inside, a voice still whispers, "You're on your own. You
Yes.
have to make this happen. Don't wait. Don't trust too much." And, this is where surrender becomes real, because surrender is not giving up. It's not passivity. It's not pretending you don't care. Surrender is standing in the unknown without abandoning yourself. It's choosing to believe that moving forward does not have to look like moving alone. And this is the truth I'm being asked to live right now, that it can be different, that the future does not have to be built from the wounds of the past. But to live that truth, I have to trust, not in what I can see, but in what has already been shown to me. And that's hard, because my mind wants things to be tangible. It wants timelines, outcomes, physical assurances. But divine guidance doesn't always arrive that way. My guru's guidance has never been loud or performative. It's always been subtle, mind to mind, heart to heart. And that subtlety is exactly what my brain is still learning to trust. Because subtle guidance doesn't overpower you, it doesn't remove doubt, it doesn't remove silence. Trust, I'm learning, is not about knowing what will happen, right? It's about noticing how I'm meeting this moment. Are my thoughts rooted in fear or openness? Are they replacing old wounds or allowing something new? Are they telling me that I'm unworthy of love, or reminding me that love has always been present? Those old stories still arise. The ones that say, "You're not worthy, you'll be disappointed, don't hope too much," and this
Mhm.
is where embodiment matters. Trust is not about repeating affirmations. Trust is noticing when
Mhm.
my thoughts drift back into old patterns and gently returning again and again and again, because I have been shown love, not in loud, worldly ways, but in quiet, unwavering presence that has never left me. That matters. That and surrender in this season looks like this: not forcing clarity, not rushing the unfolding, not demanding proof before I move, but allowing myself to live from the truth that I'm not alone in this. Like, not even my mind would say otherwise, but this is a paradox I'm holding. I don't know how it'll unfold, and I trust that it will. I don't see the full picture, and I choose to walk anyway. And maybe that's what trust really is: not certainty, not evidence, but a willingness to let love lead, even when the path is still forming beneath your feet. So, if you're standing in a season where guidance feels subtle, where answers aren't loud, where your mind wants proof but heart feels something deeper, you're not doing it wrong. You're learning how to trust without proof. And that may be one of the most sacred forms of surrender there is. Do you relate to that, Ika?
Yes, I do. I was just going to say that, oh, that sounds like something I would have written in my diary a week ago, but didn't.
Wow.
So you wrote
Yeah.
it for me in your voice.
Thank you.
It's like an exact copy of what I would have thought in my heart, but I would have perhaps um I think it's been many years since I voiced it so from the heart to, for an audience, for someone to
Yeah,
listen to. Like writing,
yeah.
yes, which would be like my conversation with God. But for sure, in the past year,
Mhm.
especially the deepening of trust and the surrender to the plan that,
Yeah.
of course, I've always had to. It was always part of my
Mhm.
path, trusting in the divine
Yeah.
guidance and support. And I was always supported, always protected,
Mhm.
always loved, like miraculously. But yeah, it's a part of my reality,
Mhm.
very much now. So it's the words are exactly to my heart.
Mhm.
I wanted
And
to ask you one last question. Sorry. Um, but just for clarity's sake, because when you
Mhm.
say you received a message from your guru,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Does that mean heart to heart communication, not a physical letter?
Right, not a physical. He's no more in his
Mhm.
physical form.
Yeah,
So when he was in physical form, I've met him multiple times, but it was a distance. He would walk, but our communication has always been heart to heart,
yeah,
always been heart to heart. It's a very special relationship that I have with him. It's like there are many versions of him in my mind, right? This is how I imagine him. There's one version that is just for me, that he's always with me, and he's always there to guide me and move me through. And then there's other versions for other people, or this one version. I don't care, but he is there with me as one version. So that's a kind of relationship I have with him. So he guides me. We have a lot of heart-to-heart conversations, and he's always been there with me, Inga, and I know that he's with me. It's that trust and surrender that really gave me the courage to even come out and speak and do what I do. I'm such a private person. I'm not I'm not a social person at all. I wouldn't even call myself as an introvert or extrovert. I'm kind of in between both. So yeah, it's a very gentle place that I'm here, and I'm out here in public sharing my voice and all that. It's very special for me, and there's one thing I really want to offer to the listeners. There are many paths to realizing consciousness, right? People meditate, people pray, people study scriptures, people walk along spiritual roads, and all of these have value. But here's a paradox I've come to understand. No matter how far we go outward, we always return to the same place, the place where the real work begins. That place is not in the technique, it's not in the practice itself. It is an understanding who the doer is. As long as there is a sense of, I am the one doing, there's no real escape from suffering, because the doer, the I, is the one that seeks, grasps, compares, and fears. And this is not a moral judgment, it's simply an observation. As long as the I remains unseen, it runs the show. We often believe spiritual growth is about adding more practices, more meditation, more prayer, more discipline. And yes, meditation is important, prayer is important, but the paradox is this: we're not only meditating for those 20 minutes a day, the real practice begins when the meditation ends. When the mind says, I want something, I don't like this, I need this to change, I need answers now, and that's the moment awareness is needed most. Because that voice, the one that says, I want, is the doer. And instead of trying to silence it, suppress it, or spiritually bypass it, the invitation is much gentler and much more radical. Watch it. Ask, who is the I? From where does this desire arise? Who is the one claiming ownership over experience? This is not an intellectual exercise, right? It's a living inquiry. You don't have to answer the question, you just have to stay with it. The moment the I is seen clearly, something shifts, not because it disappears, but because it no longer operates unconsciously. And that changes everything, Inga, because this is why self realization cannot be achieved by effort alone. The ego cannot free itself, the doer cannot undo itself. And so the timing of realization is not something we control. It unfolds when awareness ripens. And that's where the trust comes in. Trust not in the future moment of awakening, but trust in the process of noticing again and again. Each time you catch the I wanting, resisting, demanding, and you pause instead of obeying, consciousness deepens quietly, naturally. And this is why the most important spiritual discipline is not effort, it's the attention. Attention to the inner movement, attention to the voice that claims authorship, attention to that subtle sense of me trying to get somewhere, you know. And the paradox is beautiful. You don't need to get rid of the doer, you just need to see it clearly. When the doer is seen, life continues, but with less struggle. Action still happens, but without the same tension. Your desires still arise, but it doesn't own you in the same way. So, if there's one thing I would leave with you, it's this: pray if prayer moves, meditate if meditation grounds you, walk any path that resonates. But wherever you go, return to this. Who is the one doing all of this? Keep
Mhm.
that eye under gentle watch, not with suspicion, right, but with curiosity. Because the moment the doer is seen, the one who was searching begins to dissolve into awareness. And that quietly, effortlessly is where consciousness recognizes itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Thank you so much. Prashanthi, I'm going to sit with this for a while. Thank you for your words, for your wisdom and your voice. And I'm going to leave a link to your website and my, as we are on video for some reason, my computer was making icons and signs, which I had no intention of setting the reactions on the screen. Oh, so how can the listeners connect to you, find your book and your website?
Well, of course. So if anything I shared today resonated with any of you, and if something stirred, softened, or clarified, know that you're not alone in this path. We're all learning how to live more honestly, how to love without abandoning ourselves, and how to align our lives with what feels deeply true. And if you'd love to continue the conversation, ask a question, or simply reach out, you can find me through the contacts page on my website, embracingparadox.com. I am deeply grateful to be here, grateful for this journey, grateful for the Tao, and grateful to my guru, and grateful to you, Inga, for listening, for reflecting, for walking your own way. So yeah, that you could go to my website, and definitely we could connect through the website. And there's also you could read the first 5 chapters of my book on my website. So if you're interested to learn more about my work and my book, definitely check it out on my website.
Wonderful, thank you, and I'll be posting the links as well. Thank you so much, Prashanthi. It's truly been a treat and a pleasure and a blessing connecting with you.
Until next time, Inga, stay aligned, stay open, and let love be something you live.